Today is April 9th, 2020. I have just awoken from a terrible nightmare. But before I tell you about it, let me start from the beginning. 5 days ago, I left to go on vacation with my parents. We stayed at this magnificent hotel, or so it seemed from the outside. As we checked in, we were all so excited to be away from home, and not to mention I got my own room. Our room numbers were 503 and 505. Anyway, we gathered our luggage and all piled into my parents' room for dinner, and it was around 7 p.m. I, excited to see my room, hurried down my food and begged my mother for the room key. Oh, if only I knew. I made my way down the hall looking for this room 505, as we all assumed we would be room 505, as we all would assume would be one of the two rooms away from my parents. I followed the numbers down, continuing as I went along. They read 507, 509, 511, 13, 15. Then came this precarious-looking room. On the wall it read room 505, but on the door the numbers were upside down and the 0 was missing. I figured this was some elaborate prank and reached in my pocket for my key card. As I went to slide my key card, the light above me flickered, and for a second I could have sworn that the number had flashed 666. I just thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but why would it have been those numbers? Those evil numbers. Well, I never did believe in a lot of the superstitious things that normal people did. And being a teenager at the age of 17, I questioned religion, so I continued on. This room 505, it looked just as my parents' room did. This gross, grunged orange wallpaper with little shapes of things you'd seen on walls of castles. The bed linens were this dark brown cloth with white pinstripes. The curtains were almost the color of vomit, with 2 different colors running down them. Let's just say this out-of-place room wasn't very delighting to the eye. What did I care, though? I'm a teenager. All I thought about was throwing off my pants and watching television. So I got unpacked and did just that. After an hour or two of watching crime scene investigator shows on TV, I became unknowingly parched. I remembered my parents packing a cooler full of soft drinks and waters, so I pulled my gym shorts on, grabbed the room key, and hurried down the hallway. When I made it to their room, I knocked on the door, and as I was waiting for someone to answer it, I heard a faint cry, almost as if there was a baby at the other end of the hallway. Then the hairs on the back of my neck began to stand up, and a slight chill ran through my veins. I felt as if someone were standing against my back, just far enough so they weren't touching me, but close enough so I could feel their breath on my shoulder. I nervously knocked again, but this time a little harder. I looked from side to side, trying my best not to turn around. Now I could actually feel a warm, humid air blowing ferociously against the side of my neck. I wanted to turn around, but something told me that if I turned around... My mother then opened the door. I ran in and slammed the door, not looking on the outside. With my back against the door, I said, "May I have some of the drinks we brought?" I don't know why, but I feel like if I told my mother about what had just happened, I would lose my bedroom, and that was the last thing I wanted. I grabbed one of the cloth bags we had brought and filled it with some drinks and a few bags of potato chips for later, which I knew I would need. I then told my parents thank you and good night. As I exited into the hallway, I felt as if the presence that overwhelmed me before had vanished. So I hurried back down to my room at the end of the hallway before it showed up again. When I made it to my room, I noticed the numbers on my door had changed again, and somehow the 0 was there. This time they had been rearranged to read 550. I thought this was very strange, and whoever was messing with me was doing quite a good job at it. I pulled out my key card, and for some reason, something made me turn my head to look down at the end of the hallway. A tall, shadowy figure stood at the end, and in its arms were what looked to be a newborn baby. The baby was crying the exact same sound as before. I was petrified, so I hurried into my room and locked the door. As I entered my room, I laid down my bag to realize that someone had pulled my comforter down as if it wanted me to enter the bed and sleep. At this point, I was terrified and didn't know what to do. All I knew was that I had to face this because I did not want to lose my room. That night, I ignored its plea to sleep in that bed, so I crashed on the couch with my bag of chips at my feet. The next morning, I got a call from my mother telling me to get ready to leave and to meet her outside the room in 30 minutes. I looked at my phone. The time read 8:05. Then I realized I had forgotten to charge my phone last night, and the battery read 25%. So I decided to leave it to let it charge. That was the worst mistake I had ever made. I had gotten a shower and got dressed, ready to leave. I grabbed my wallet and slid the key card to room 505 in one of the sleeves. The phone rang again, and without hesitation, I picked it up to hear Mother tell me that it was supposed to storm today, and that I needed to bring a jacket. I agreed before hanging up. Then we left the hotel to go on whatever exciting adventure awaited us that day. I'm known for getting sick when we go on vacations. My mother blames it on the air pressure. Dad blames it on not wearing enough clothes. No matter what causes it, I always end up with some sort of sickness before the end of the trip. When we arrived at the hotel, I'm coughing and sniffling. My mother tells me to take some medicine and try to get some rest after dinner. But being a teenager, I do the exact opposite. After dinner, I head back to my room, anticipating something strange to happen like last night. Nothing. The door to my room still read room 550, and it had looked as if the cleaning staff had come in and made my bed and cleaned up all the crumbs around the couch from last night. The only thing that truly caught my attention was that my phone had been pulled off the charging cable, and on the home screen, the word punishment was written. Ignoring it, I grabbed a soda and threw myself into bed and watched some more crime scene investigator shows. I awoke the next morning to find myself curled underneath the comforter, shivering. My body felt as if I had been thrown into the depths of hell, then coughed back up to this putrid bed. My body is coated with a layer of sweat, and yet I feel cold. I never really understood why fevers make you cold when your body is of a higher degree. I guess it's like a glass window in the middle of winter. All the condensation built up from being warm on the inside, but cold on the outside. But at this point, all I could think about was this undying thirst and just how fucking cold I was. I could feel my bones rattling from the inside out. I needed to get up to get something to drink, or at least call my mother to tell her my situation, but I felt as if I couldn't move. So I decided to rest. Now, here I am, lying in this goddamn bed. This brown, putrid-smelling, sweat-stained bed. I've been lying here in my own excrement, going on 4 days now. I feel disgusting, and my mouth has begun to wither. The funny thing about this is, I find laying here, soaked in piss, staring at this clock, more enjoyable than when I fall asleep now. These dreams, I swear they get worse and worse every night. Each one as realistic as the last. I feel like something evil has taken over me. Last night, I dreamt that I watched myself lay in this bed, tortured by that same shadowy figure from 4 nights ago, who was now standing at my bedside, smiling. On its neck, or what seemed to be his neck, was the name Shekel. Dr. Shekel. At his side were a series of tools ranging from doctor's scalpels to a box of nails and a hammer. I couldn't speak. I tried yelling at my physical self to wake up, but no sound ever came from my mouth, only the feeling of being strangled as punishment. I felt as if he was punishing me for something, but what had I done? He used the hammer to drive a nail into each of my 28 finger segments. The whole time, my physical being stared into the eyes of my celestial being with this dead, distraught look. After he finished with the nails, he began to carve the word punishment in every inch of my body with the scalpel, with very deep, emphasized incisions. I continued to tell myself that this was all just a dream, but what had I done to deserve such a fate? Now I lay here, anticipating the worst. What more can it throw at me now? How much more suffering can Dr. Shekel inflict? I've just awoken to what I believe is the most satisfying night I've had in a long time. I didn't dream. I've awoken to what seemed to be a slight bit of strength, at least enough to lift my hands. I reached over to the side table where the telephone rested and began to dial my parents' room. Room 503. There was no answer. I've become quite uneasy again since that dead silent dial tone. Almost as if Dr. Shekel was here, watching and waiting. I tried to muster enough strength to crawl out of the godforsaken bed, but something was restricting me from getting up, and I began to sob at the thought that maybe he got my parents, or maybe I was dead. At this point, the real world was starting to feel like a dream, mainly because I've lost feeling in most of my body now from laying here for so long. The last moment my eyes were open, I saw the clock read 5:05 a.m. The last thought that ran through my mind was that I'm cold. You cannot move. You cannot breathe. You are stricken here forever. Those words kept repeating in my head as my eyelids closed. After forcing my eyes open, I'd awoken to the front of a chapel as dark and red as blood. The sky was dark, headed by a moon painted red. There was a distant sound of the dying souls of many unborn children. On the doors of the church was the word punishment. I was in hell. There was no doubt about it. I fell to my knees and begged whoever it was to please let me go. The doors of the church swung open, and a dark voice that sounded like 100 men all at once said, "Please come in." I don't know what drew me in, but my body took flight by itself, and I began to walk uncontrollably to the steps. There were 5 steps, each with different but similar words on them that read, agony, despair, hopelessness, pain, and punishment. I began sobbing greatly as I knew this was the end. This was the last time I was to ever exist. I was going to suffer to a life of punishment. The word Dr. Shekel had granted and embroidered me with, almost as if he had labeled my soul with such a fate. I took a step inside the church to wait for what horrible fate I deserved. The inside of the church was lined with thick, jagged barbed wire, and the walls were coated in the blood of thousands that had coagulated hundreds of times before. The pews were seated with thousands of lost souls waiting to be entertained by my punishment. I recognized a few faces in the crowd. From where, though, I don't understand, but what really drew my attention were the 2 agonizing faces at the front of the church. My mother and my father were waiting at the altar, which stood 4 stories in the shape of a pentagram, as if to baptize me. They were weeping with tears of joy. What more could he do to me? I was forced by an unknown power to the altar, all the souls' faces on me, staring deep into my soul as if to catch me trying to escape. I stood there, facing a dark figure and Dr. Shekel standing side by side, laughing, while my parents, to the right, stood there, smiling. This had to be punishment by itself. Who knows what fate awaits my poor, innocent soul? The dark figure with the voice of 100 men called upon me, and as I stood in front of him, he said, "You have no choices here. I control you and you feel me." He then lifted me into the air and tied me upside down to the altar. He pulled a thin, gorgeous blade from his shroud of darkness. Its hilt was made out of the bones of demons, and the blade itself was stained red from the blood of his many victims. He then held this blade to my throat and made a deep incision in my jugular, causing me to gasp for air. He then began shouting and screaming, which sounded like every soul from the depths of hell all at once in a magnificent chorus of death. He then exclaimed, "He is not the one. His soul is too pure. What is this?" All at once my body was sucked into a vortex of darkness. In what felt like 3 days, I was stuck in this tormenting nothingness and bitter silence. I felt tired, cold, and uneasy, as if waiting for some relief. I then awoke to my mother standing over me, and my father sitting in a chair to the side. She told me that I had been in the hospital for a few months, and that the doctor had said that I wasn't going to wake up for possibly a few more. She told me that we were on vacation, and that one night, after having a terrible fever, I just never woke up. I asked her what room we were in, and she told me a room 505, and described everything in the room to her as if I were still there, and then I told her about what had happened. When I mentioned Dr. Shekel, she then told us about how my original doctor, from when they had first admitted me into the hospital 2 months ago, was named Dr. Shekel, and how he had committed suicide the day after I arrived. My name is Tyler, and I'm 17 years old. I'm not sure what happened the day we went on vacation, or anything that happened while I was in a coma. One thing I am sure about is that whatever it was had gotten the wrong person. And I'm not here to tell you my story, but to warn you. Whatever it was that got me is obviously angry, and will not stop until he finds the right victim. I have no idea what he's looking for or how to tell, but I'm almost certain that whoever it is has done some terrible things in their life, things that you or I can't ever begin to imagine. My only advice for you is to be careful, and don't ever take your lives for granted. I never believed in heaven or hell up until that day in the hospital. Now I am a religious churchgoer who will never again question what is heaven or hell and do they exist. Take my word for it. You never want to experience the things I went through. For your own sake, be good little boys and girls. And remember, Dr. Shekel is always watching.